Have you ever wondered what would happen if a world champion like Hamilton publicly exposed Ferrari's internal weaknesses from within? Well, that exactly happened in Singapore, and the consequences could be devastating. The 2025 Singapore Grand Prix was not just one more calendar race. It was the perfect scenario to emerge an internal fracture in Ferrari that had been managing for months. A challenging urban circuit such as Marina Bay, characterized by its demanding temperature, its closed curves and the need for absolute precision in car management, ended up becoming the catalyst in a crisis. From the first free training, tension signs were already noticed. The SF25 failed to enter the optimal temperature window in tires, something essential to perform in classification in this type of route. Thermal degradation, especially on the rear axle, was more severe than expected. The pilots were fighting with a car that did not respond, that seemed to resist any type of fine adjustment. The filtered radios between engineers and pilots showed nervousness, lack of direction, and a clear technical disconnection that was just a reflection of a deeper evil. And then the classification came. In a circuit where the grille position is everything, Ferrari failed loudly. Hamilton could barely qualify in a distant fourth row, while Leclerc was trapped in traffic and bad synchronization, falling further back. But the worst was not the result. The most alarming was the posterior reaction. At the end of the race, which concluded with Leclerc in 6th position and Hamilton in 8th, the 7-time champion did not hold his frustration. Instead of protecting his team or softening the speech as a newly arrived pilot usually does, he lashed out with a surgical coldness that he left everywhere frozen. He said that in Mercedes they would never have made such basic mistakes. It was not an isolated criticism, it was a public sentence that questioned Ferrari's organizational capacity. Leclerc, on the other hand, showed a completely different image. His body language was resigned. In later interviews, he acknowledged that both he and Hamilton feel as passengers in the car. A phrase that, coming from a pilot that has grown within the Ferrari structure, represents an act of hopelessness rather than self-criticism. He openly declared that they have no car to fight the front, a statement that destroys any optimistic narrative that could be about the potential of the SF25. What really lived in Singapore was an emotional fracture, a public breakdown of the link between pilots and equipment. And this, in a team like Ferrari, where internal policy and public image are almost as important as track performance, marks a before and after. Because if there is something that differentiates the champions' teams from the lost teams in their identity, it is the way they face crises. In Ferrari, that crisis can no longer be hidden. The great unknown now is not whether they have the car to fight. The real question is whether they have the structure, leadership, and culture to resist this storm. Talking about SF25 is talking about a machine that has been trapped between two ages, the promise of a renewed Ferrari and the reality of a team that has not been able to adapt to the technical demands of the new Formula One. What happened in Singapore 2025 was not an isolated accident, it was the most visible symptom of a structural problem that has been climbing from the pre-season. The heart of the problem is at the base of the car design. The SF25 suffers from an extremely narrow operation window. This means that to perform to the maximum, the car needs a combination of very specific technical factors. Ideal tire temperature, a track with medium-high adhesion level, and a perfect aerodynamic balance between front and rear axle. If one of those factors decomposes, as happened in Singapore with temperature and atmospheric pressure, the performance collapses. And we don't talk about tenths, we talk about seconds. The career in Marina Bay exposed all these weaknesses at the same time. From Vuelta 8, both Hamilton and Leclerc had to activate the lift and coast mode, a technique that consists of lifting the throttle foot long before the braking point, sometimes up to 200 meters before usual, to reduce thermal stress in the brakes. It is a containment maneuver, not performance. It is used in extreme cases, and that Ferrari has had to apply it so early in the race is a direct testimony that the SF25 not only is not optimized, but also cannot sustain a competitive rhythm in demanding conditions. The thermal management of the car is, at this point, one of the largest Achilles heels of the project. In classification, the loss of only 5 or 6 degrees in the rear tires completely compromises the traction at the exit of slow curves, which in a circuit like Singapore where these curves abound is a sentence. Hamilton explained it with a devastating precision. It doesn't matter how good the pilot is, if the thermal performance window is lost, the return is destroyed before completing it. The car also seems unable to adapt to different piloting styles. While Hamilton has tried to bring the car to his most aggressive style of late braking and early rotation, Leclerc has tried to maintain the fluidity that worked with the SF24. None has been successful. And that can only mean one thing. The car has an unpredictable behavior in limit conditions, which is the worst possible scenario for a team that aspires to championships. To this is added a worrying pattern in making strategic decision-making. In Singapore, Ferrari not only failed to run on the track, he also made serious mistakes in planning. The choice of times for tire changes, the lack of adaptation to the evolution of the track, and a wrong reading of the career rhythm of their rivals converted an opportunity to rescue valuable points into a tactical humiliation. Hamilton's statement was more than a criticism. It was an act of symbolic rebellion against a culture of mediocrity that he is no longer willing to tolerate. A pilot of half-grilled desperate for attention did not say it. A heptacampion of the world said it, which Ferrari chose not only for his historical legacy, but because he believed that he could be the man who led his resurgence. But what he found within Maranello was an institutionalized ecosystem of errors, late decisions, and a constant search for excuses before solutions. And he made it clear with a phrase that is already historical. In Mercedes, they would never have made such a basic mistake. When a Hamilton-caliber figure launches that kind of criticism, it is not simply talking about the failure of a box's engineer. He is pointing precisely a systemic failure. It is exposing a corporate culture that, despite the changes of directors, technicians, and pilots, has failed to evolve with the modern demand of Formula One. That the coup not only went to the technical team, it went to the entire Ferrari board of directors. And in a team where each public word is carefully measured, the silence that followed was even more eloquent. There were no communications. There was no open defense. Because they know that this time there is no possible defense. Hamilton simply said aloud what many inside the paddock have already whispered for a long time. And then there is Leclerc. His reaction was almost opposite, but no less revealing. Leclerc did not explode. He did not point out with his finger, but his words weighed the same. He said, feeling like a passenger in the car, as someone who no longer has control over their destiny. That, in emotional terms, is devastating. Because a pilot who loses faith in his work tool also loses his ability to fight. And when one of the main faces of the project admits to be defeated by the machine it represents, what is at stake is no longer the position in the table, but the soul of the team. And this is where the real drama begins. Because Ferrari is not only dealing with an inefficient car, he is facing a silent war of psychological wear. Leclerc, which has been the public face of the project since 2019, now sees how its role as leader is displaced by a much more dominant and vocal figure. And although both have managed so far the situation with respect, it is inevitable to ask how much time will happen before the internal tensions become unsustainable. In addition, from a political perspective, Hamilton's statements force senior management to take position. Is the most laureate pilot in history support and an internal purge is made to renew processes? Or do you choose to protect the existing structure and the relationship with Hamilton begins to erode? Any decision will cost. The 2025 Singapore Grand Prix not only presented the cracks of the Ferrari project, he amplified them, made them impossible to ignore. What remains now is an inevitable question. What follows Ferrari? In the short term, the equipment has three urgent action fronts. The first is technical. SF25 needs immediate solutions to maintain minimal competitiveness. It is no longer about winning, but not completely losing the season before the summer break. This involves rethinking motor maps, redesigning cooling schemes, and finding a new balance between performance and reliability that allows pilots to run without fear of running out of brakes in Tour 59. In the medium term, Ferrari needs more than talent at the wheel. You need a redesign of your technical command chain. The strategy department must be renewed, not only in names but in methodology. The development team must stop thinking about the car as a set of loose pieces and begin to conceive it as a dynamic ecosystem that evolves week by week. What happened in Singapore was not an anecdote. It was a warning. A red alert about a giant who, despite having two of the best pilots in the grid, continues to be lost in his own history, in his own contradictions, in his eternal struggle to reinvent himself without betraying. Hamilton's words were an act of rupture, but also a cry for help. Because no one, not even he, wants to see Ferrari fail. Everyone wants Ferrari to be Ferrari again. But for that, it needs more than power and aerodynamics. You need conviction. Conviction to assume errors without makeup. Conviction to break old schemes. Conviction to lead from humility, not from the symbolic weight of a shield. And now I ask you directly, do you think Hamilton can change Ferrari's course from the inside, or will end up being absorbed by the same system that has made so many before him? Are we facing the beginning of a revolution, or before another disappointment that will be added to the long list of broken promises in Maranello? Leave me your opinion in the comments.